History remembers the British Empire with images of redcoats, railways, and a mission to civilize the world. We are told they brought order and law. But beneath this story of progress lies a much darker history, one that has been deliberately obscured. A history written in the bones of tens of millions of people. These were not deaths from war, they were deaths from hunger. We have been taught that the great famines of Ireland and India were tragic, natural disasters, unfortunate acts of God. This is a lie. The truth is far more sinister. Using their own colonial records and economic data, a terrifying picture emerges. These famines were not accidents. They were the inevitable result of a systematic machine of extraction deliberately engineered to control colonial populations. Britain didn't just rule its colonies. In many cases, it weaponized hunger itself, perfecting a system of famine by policy. This is the blueprint for how to starve a nation into submission. The first tool in Britain's arsenal was not a gun, but an idea: the free market. While Britain fiercely protected its own economy, it forced this rigid ideology upon its colonies with lethal consequences. The most horrifying test case was Ireland in the 1840s. When the potato blight struck, it was a crisis, but it was not a food shortage. It was a famine of economics. Historical records are undeniable. During the worst years of the famine, Ireland was exporting massive quantities of food. Ships filled with cattle, grain, and butter sailed from ports where skeletal figures begged for a single potato. Why? Because British officials, led by men like Charles Trevelyan, were disciples of a radical laissez-faire doctrine. They believed that interfering with the market, even to provide food to the starving, was a violation of economic law. They called government aid a moral evil that would make the Irish lazy. While millions of Irish families disintegrated, British officials declared that the judgment of God was sending a lesson and that the market would correct itself. It was the systematic application of a deadly ideology, turning a crisis into a holocaust and emptying the Irish countryside for British landlords. This wasn't policy failure, it was policy success. In India, Britain perfected an even more ambitious system of economic devastation. For centuries, Indian agriculture was built on a foundation of food security, with villages growing crops to feed themselves. The British systematically dismantled this. Through crushing taxes and land reforms, they forced farmers off their land or into a vicious cycle of debt. Subsistence farming, growing food to live, was replaced by a system of forced commercial cropping. Farmers were compelled to grow cash crops the empire demanded: opium for the China trade, indigo for British textiles, cotton for the mills in Manchester. The result was a complete rewiring of the Indian agricultural landscape. Land that once grew rice and millet was now dedicated to producing raw materials for Britain. The intricate network of local village granaries that had served as a buffer against drought for centuries was eliminated. India was transformed into a vast plantation for the empire. Its people left completely exposed. When the monsoons inevitably failed, as they did in the late 1870s, there was no food. A drought became a famine, not because nature was cruel, but because the system was designed to have no safety net. As tens of millions starved in India, the British Viceroy, Lord Lytton, was hosting lavish banquets celebrating the coronation of Queen Victoria as Empress of India. His response to the famine reveals the cold, mathematical cruelty of the imperial system. He didn't organize a massive relief effort. Instead, he implemented famine relief camps governed by a brutal set of rules. To receive aid, starving Indians had to abandon their villages and march hundreds of miles to these camps, where they were forced into hard labor. The payment for this backbreaking work? A wage that was scientifically calculated to be less than the rations given to prisoners in Nazi concentration camps like Buchenwald. It was called the temple wage, based on a study of what was needed for the barest human survival. British officials openly debated the precise number of calories needed to keep a man alive for labor without wasting imperial funds. Millions died in these camps, not just from starvation, but from the diseases that ravaged their emaciated bodies. This wasn't charity. It was a system of control, designed to manage a humanitarian disaster at the lowest possible cost, while ensuring the machinery of colonial extraction continued to run. The Great Famines of the British Empire were not a series of unfortunate tragedies. They were the predictable outcome of a system of colonial policy. A system that weaponized economic dogma, systematically destroyed food security, and governed with a cold arithmetic of profit and loss. Historians like Mike Davis estimate that the death toll from these man-made famines could be as high as 100 million people. These people were not just victims of history, they were casualties of a deliberate, calculated, and devastatingly effective system of control, proving that the most powerful weapon in the arsenal of an empire isn't always its army, but its ability to decide who gets to eat and who is left to starve.